set the tone, what is flourishing? I think we all kind of have a similar working definition. Selena gave us a very powerful keynote, thank you again, on why flourishing. So we got the what, Selena gave us the why. Why? Because the silos aren't working. Why? Because unconditional positive regard makes a difference. Why? Because, if you don't do whatever it takes, it's not getting done. Thank you. And so the balance of the day is how flourishing. Because it's great, right? Sounds real good. But systemic change, cultural change, transformation. So that's what we're focusing on. And your voices are just as important as our panelists that I'm calling up right now. Our morning panel on how we can get this done is, and panelists, just come on up. I'm going to call you up and give you a proper introduction. So this panel is going to be moderated by Jessica Correa. Jessica is the Senior Outreach Manager for Southern California. This is Jessica here, for the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank. Also has extensive knowledge in the housing sector. Saba, who needs no introduction in a space like this, Saba Mwine Chang, is the Deputy Chief Community Officer at the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, LAHSA. Sam Simbaris, who you may know. Sam is the founder and CEO of Pathways Housing First Initiative. He's also executive director of the LA VA Center for Excellence for Training and Research on Veterans Homelessness and Recovery. He was also in 2024 one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people. He loves when I say that. And you may know, some of you know, but you need to know. If you have heard the term housing first, Sam is the godfather, the brainchild, the mother. If it's his child, maybe he's the mother of housing first. And Heidi Befarouz. I want to pronounce it right, is that?
Yes, you did.
Oh, okay, all right. Heidi Befarouz is the medical director of Housing for Health Initiative with Department of Health Services, LA County, which is really the permanent supportive housing approach. And so if we can get flourishing and empowerment in if it can work in permanent supportive housing, it can work. And so this is going to be a great conversation about accountability and the big how. So let me just hand it over to Jessica. Thank you so much, and our morning panel.
So real quick, just to kind of level set, a lot of you are probably, why is somebody from the Federal Reserve here? We're a small but mighty team in community development where we really spend our time engaging communities across our district. I'm based here in Los Angeles. I actually come from this work for 3 years. I worked at the Corporation for Supportive Housing. I managed what at the time was the first and maybe the only ever Pay for Success project in the County of Los Angeles. And the work that you all do here affects all communities, but especially those that are most vulnerable. And my colleagues at the Federal Reserve in New York actually recently came out with their own white paper that they, I think, need to work on the title, but it's called the Making Missing Markets Initiative. And the idea behind this is that we have been spending what equates to, if you add it all up, upwards of trillions of dollars on working in these most vulnerable communities, and we have not been getting the results that we want. So the idea behind it is that we have the knowledge, we have the research, we even have enough money to create much better outcomes, but those resources are not currently aligned to create incentives, and they do not have the types of models that target those upstream determinants of health, equity, climate adaptation, resilience, economic growth, everything that we want for our society, we aren't aligning that work properly in a way that really gets us to that goal. So they kind of have come up with this idea that if we can create this missing market by working within the existing ecosystems and or creating new ones that will allow new sources of capital to come to community needs and scale existing sources of capital to meet those needs. And then connect the people that are currently not working together to finance solutions that create this value. And all with that overarching goal of service of creating an economy that works for all. So when I think about that, and I think about what we're talking about today, and flourishing, it's like I love the word flourishing because it really speaks to the people side of the work. And I think it's the part of the work that is often forgotten because we are always trying to get to our next deliverable, our next outcome, our next funding cycle, our next grant. And we never take the time to sit there and think, could we be doing this work differently? What would it mean to truly exist in the system where we can apply flourishing frameworks? And so I wanted to start the panel by asking each of the panelists, in your own work, how can those flourishing frameworks be implemented? How you come to this work. So whether it's from research, from practice, from policy, how can you see this flourishing framework really begin to be implemented? And I'll start with Dr. Hyde.
Well, I always like to tell stories just to kind of root it in what we do every day. So yesterday, I visited a recuperative care center. It's a medical respite. It's not PSH, but it's often the place where people are rehabilitating to then enter permanent supportive housing. And we had a very rich staff there. There are providers, there are social workers, there are case managers, there are nurses, there are peer workers, client aides. And the team was telling me about how challenging it is to flourish in this environment. They shared a story about a gentleman named David, who was a 51-year-old gentleman that had been found in Sepulveda Basin near a riverbed, who was profoundly dehydrated and weak, had uncontrolled diabetes, had schizophrenia, meth use. These are common scenarios that our frontline service workers manage every single day. And he came into the medical respite unit and they worked with him for 2 years. In 2 years, because we don't have good throughput, one could argue, why is this person in a medical respite with all of this, fancy healthcare for 2 years? And, we can talk about that. But we should talk about that. Who said that?
I did.
Oh, yeah. But one of the things we say is you do what it takes. So in those 2 years, we're not just working on getting him stable, getting his diabetes under control, getting the long-acting injectable, working on his meth addiction, because it takes that long, right? There's this weird sort of notion that someone like him, who's been literally street homeless for 15 years, had a lot of trauma as a child, that somehow miraculously in 3 months, he's supposed to be this, crazy, right? 2 years is a reasonable period of time, but it takes a lot and a lot of teamwork to support him. And he was doing much better. He stopped using, he got connected to mental health, he was getting to his own appointments, his diabetes was under control. They did a contingency management program, he was getting rewards, he was thriving, he was flourishing. And the time came for him to move to permanent housing. It took that long for him to get a voucher and to find an apartment. And then the team started to cry. The nurse, the provider, the caseworker, crying in a room full of 40 people about how he was sent last week to go to a permanent supportive housing unit, but the system wasn't ready to get him in. Why? Because the permanent supportive housing unit he was going to does not have that full team. It's one ICMS who is completely overwhelmed. They said there's been a turnover of 4 ICMS workers. One of them died. 2 of them quit. He met the ICMS once, and the day he was supposed to go out, she quit. And David went into the building apartment once, didn't have the accompaniment of the ICMS. Bless her. There's no villain in this story. It really isn't. And was overwhelmed. He got anxious. He could smell meth. And he went back to the riverbed. And he called the nurse and he said, I can't do this. Will you come find me? I want to come back. The team knew this was not going to work, right? But guess what? His voucher was going to expire. And if he didn't get housed, the opportunity for him to come back and get housed was less, right? This is the reality that our service workers face every single day. They are incredible people, but we're putting a lot on them. And one of the things that's really important, and Selena talked about this, is the structural violence behind all of this. That it's not just the clients facing this, it's our frontline staff facing this. There's vicarious trauma, there's that demoralization, there's like, how do I do this when the system is broken, right? So you think about it, if you step back and we started trying to do problem solving, right? Tell me more. Could you have gotten FSP involved, DMH? Well, no, because he had cleaned up so much in respite, he was no longer eligible for field-based mental health services, right? He wasn't using anymore. So why would you attach a substance use counselor, right? The ICMS we talked about, right? So how do we do this better, right? And all I'm saying is it cannot be on the shoulder of that ICMS. So when we talk about accountability and collaboration, it's on us. We have to be on the ground accompanying not only the clients, but our frontline service workers to give them the tools that they need. And one of the things we're trying to do at Housing for Health is get out there on the dance floor and accompany. Because this work is hard. And we have to be there witnessing, listening, and trying to problem solve. And I was talking to Sam earlier, we're expecting our ICMS all of a sudden to be nurses, social workers, doctors, case managers, therapists, problem solvers, property management, negotiators, right? It's crazy. Right? Without training, without clinical supervision, without rest, right? Without money, without proper compensation. Right. So what do we do as a system to help them flourish is we have to go and we have to provide support in real time. It's not about funding. It's about standing in solidarity with them. It's showing up. It's listening. Yesterday turned into group therapy. I was there to train on the recovery model. It was group therapy, right? But how do we create the funding for that? Because the system, like you were saying, is very much on slots, get people in, move, voucher expiring. You're not eligible for this. You're not eligible for that. We aren't setting aside budget to do accompaniment. It's not billable. My time yesterday for 4 hours is not billable, but it's crucial to flourishing. And I think we have ways of solving this issue, but it's really a reframe on what we consider value add, right? And how do we invest in the people who are doing this work?
Sam, go ahead.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I know a lot about Housing First, but I wasn't asked to speak about that. And I don't know a lot about flourishing, so that's what they're asking me to speak about. So I've been reflecting on what that means. And I don't actually have a definition of it, but I'll tell you what thoughts come to mind, because I think I think we maybe can have a consensus about what flourishing looks like. I mean, in the work that we do, the terms that we usually use are stabilization, recovery, and recovery is sort of often as high as it goes, meaning the person has a life outside the system, that we are not their main sources of support, so they're on their way to recovery or recovering. And I think this term flourishing takes us past recovery into a new paradigm where it's not even referenced back to the system. The person is having a life, independent of the service support, or perhaps with service support. But it's a different why I think it's useful and we should embrace it is because it speaks about a life that is outside of systems, and how do we get there? And how do we get there? Because it's conceptually we're all in agreement, but the how, the big how, which is this panel, is something I've been thinking about, and I don't know, but I wanted to share my first experience in learning how to be a therapist. Selena kind of inspired me to kind of share stories that way, so I thank you, Selena, for that. But I was actually, I was in a graduate psychology program studying social psychology, lab research, and wasn't really doing it for me. And I gravitated over to clinical, and I transferred, and I was in the clinical program. And in part of the clinical program, I was sent to Bronx State Psychiatric Hospital to do what they call an externship, 2 or 3 days a week. And I was there with the other psychology interns, but not, formally an intern. It was like a pre-internship. And I had a supervisor named Moishe Vardy. We probably have had like 5,000 professors amongst us collectively, and you only remember like 3 or 4, right? So I remember Moishe Vardy had a kind of an accented English, and he assigned me to work with this man, Vincent, who was on the inpatient service. And he says, go do an intake on Vincent. I was from social. I didn't really know what a clinical intake was. So like, give me a hint, like what should I do? So, find out why he's here, how old he is, and, like his family. Oh, collect data. I got that. So I go, I find Vincent. He's a little older than me. And I start asking him the questions on the intake. He's from the Bronx. He only got hospitalized about a month ago. His family's in the Bronx. He has 2 sisters. He's the middle child. The older sister left before she finished high school. Then it was like 45 minutes. I learned, 45 minutes. That's it, Vincent. I go back to Moishe, and I said, I learned, he's from here, and this is what he's doing. He's been here a month. And Moishe is like, okay, that's good. That's good. Like, why did his sister leave, and what happened to him? Did he finish high school? And, are his parents still together? It's like, okay, more. So I go back, I meet with Vincent, I get all these questions, and I go back to Moishe, I report back. And he says, oh, I see. So he got the shoe job, and then why did he leave the shoe job, and how did he end up at the hospital? And I'm like, Moishe, like, what is this about? Like, what is my mission here? What am I supposed to be doing? And he says, well, you're trying to interview Vincent to get his experience, what his experience has been, and maybe even to help him put his experience in context, because then you'll understand what Vincent is going through, and understanding is the first step to love. It's like, I still remember that 40 years later. It's like the first step to love. And it's like, oh, that's what this business is about. How how do we work with people in a way that lets them feel that we care about them in that kind of profound way? And certainly empowerment is offering people the choices to decide for themselves what's most important. That's how we got to housing first. Everybody who's homeless wanted housing first. That was kind of very palpable from the beginning, and empowerment worked even after that. But where are we now? And does the system actually, in all of these programs, housing first programs or other programs, are we actually supporting flourishing? And I think we have a long way to go, because what happens when you have the kind of individual work like I was doing with Vincent, then it's about this person. But then there's a paradox when we create a program. We can't run the program just for Vincent. We have to start making compromises and run it for everybody in the program. And then the program is narrower. And because the program is narrower, individual choices are restricted. And if individual choices are restricted, then your flourishing becomes narrower as well, your capacity for flourishing. Even when you try and open that up and push against that, and you say, what do you really want to do? You have a place, you're doing okay, what do you want to do? People will say, I want to join a gym. I want to go to the library. I want to take a course. I want to take a trip to North Carolina. I haven't seen my relatives. Then it's like, well, who has money for that? So it's like you're opening up the possibilities of flourishing, but without the resources for supporting them. So I think it's a bold and wonderful mission, but I think the how has to be well thought out if we're actually going to achieve it and not frustrate people by it.
I feel honored to be here. Thank you so much for our togetherness in this room and this beautiful subject of flourishing, which to me, I see so many facets to that topic. And I'm so glad love came up because that's a framework that I think, and I've said this before, is something that we all know. We know what it is to feel loved. We know when we love someone, how that feels, that kind of togetherness. And I'm kind of an anomaly, I think, in a lot of ways, because I come to this work as an artist. I started, I think because of my own developmental traumas, I really needed the arts growing up. I needed play. I needed to stay in that play space. I needed ensemble, community in the theater, and I needed belonging. I moved to the U.S. I'm an immigrant from Uganda and Egypt. I moved here as a child, and I always felt in public school. I was in Virginia, Fairfax, Virginia. No one told me about the history of enslavement. In Virginia, we were one of the few Black families, in the suburb that I grew up in. And, you feel when you're in an institution, you can feel when you don't belong. You can feel it. And it's not necessarily one person or because of an interpersonal relationship. It's more the values that may be named but not practiced, that you feel in your body. And I often talk about, I don't talk about white supremacy as frequently as I used to before the DEI order. But when I have, I think that one of the things that harms us the most is the disconnection that it asks us to maintain. Disconnection from our own hearts, disconnection from each other, because certainly if we were to be connected, then we might start a multiracial coalition, right? And that's at the base. And so I think that the revolution is in love, revolutionary love, like Selena said. And we do want to model our systems. I mean, it's great. I was at the National Alliance to End Homelessness conference, I think it's the one in July, and I went to a talk by a PhD student, Isaac Sanders, and he works with youth experiencing homelessness, and he's developing a framework for services based in love. Like, what if our institutions were modeled in love? And of course, there's Bell Hooks's work and her book. And when I had the honor of being the inaugural managing director of HPRI, which thank you so much, Seth, for taking that torch and bringing us to this space where we're still talking about some of the things that we practiced together when I was at HPRI, which is trauma-informed approaches, the principles of trauma-informed care, and an invitation, because you have the principles in your head and you're like, okay, I'm gonna go out, let me keep them in there and, let me practice, what does this look like? And I think in practice, because of the disruption that we have as a society around, the grounding of our nation in this concept of basically, racism, we have to flex that muscle about how do I, first of all, belong to myself? How am I going to heal? How do I respond to the calling in my heart instead of pushing it aside and moving? Because it starts with us. And then it's the question of, well, what does that look like interpersonally? How can I embed it in my institution? And how can I embed that belonging, which, John Powell has given us that framework, in practice in all of our ways of being? And how can we do that in a shared way so that Los Angeles is a place of belonging for all of us? I mean, I think we can. I love this idea of building on love as a practice together. And I would always invite everyone at HPRI and in this room and maybe later on to share a story about, well, tell me a story about how, you felt like authentically collaborated with, or how did you practice, that principle of choice for yourself? Because storytelling's, that's the humanity part, because we've been doing that sitting around fires, right from early, that's how we learn. And so I think if we can share more stories like we're doing today, and then get intentional, not at the expense of our evidence-based approaches, because I think they're all trying to get us there, right? But how can we get intentional of being like, I'm going to love you. I'm going to love myself, and I'm going to practice love with you, with the people that I am in this work with. And I'm going to invite that scholar. I'm going to ask him if he'd come talk to HPRI because I think we need more action around what it looks like to create love and belonging, and use that as a centering building block to this work, the thing that Flourishing is calling for us to do.
Well, thank you for that. Just reflecting on some things that we heard right now. I love this idea of thinking about the person, and I think, Heidi, you actually also acknowledge the fact that one example, and while it's really important to be able to tell the story, is just one of many examples that you could give, right? So, it's, when you think about the enormity of what we're trying to solve, right? People get lost in the numbers, right? You fill all of Dodger Stadium and you still have 12,000 people in the parking lot, and that's the size of our current unhoused population in Los Angeles County, right? And how many of those are a David, who need something other than what the system is currently offering them? And Sam, when you mentioned how we come to this with all good intentions, but then we create a program and then we basically cut out so much of more of what we need to do, because, well, not 100% of those people are going to need the type of attention that David did, right? There are going to continue to be those people, and we have not created systems that allow for that. And the other thing that's really, always been frustrating for me working in this sector is that what gets measured gets funded, and that's all anybody cares about, right? So anybody who's worked for an organization, and they can all rattle off what their percentage of people housed after a year, 2 years, etc. Do we go around talking about how much of our employees we've retained? How many of our employees have quit, passed away, moved on, left the country because they just couldn't deal with this anymore? Then we moved on to, who would do the best work is people who actually came from the same expertise. Let's re-traumatize them all and have them be the ones doing all the work on a regular basis, right?
And not pay them well.
Exactly. And so we keep trying to iterate on something that really, in some ways, we just have to give up on the iteration, right? We know it works, right? Housing first is a model that works.
Yes.
Permanent supportive housing is a model that works. We've done all those studies. We know it saves the money, right? We've done all those studies. One I was part of, it saved all the money, right? We knew that putting people in a housing placement over having them be in jail saved money. But the problem with it is that we still can't get to that next step of like, okay, if we know exactly what to do and we know what works, how do we actually empower people and trust them, those working in the system, that they know how to best implement this? Not how it's been designed for the money to flow, but how it actually can begin to be based on the real outcomes of the participants, right? So this is something that I when I was at CSH, I spent a lot of time thinking about is, what about the people who do want more than a unit and a key, right?
Yes.
What about the people who want to, you gave a modest thing, join a gym, visit family. But I'm saying move out of supportive housing at some point. The idea of moving on. There is no service provider is currently being paid for the work that it takes to get somebody to move out of supportive housing, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with any housing that's subsidized. Why would anybody want to risk that they end up back in that riverbed by giving up their voucher to move on to something else?
Oh my goodness, I'm so glad to be here this morning. My name is Renee Wyatt, and I am a proud USC doctorate candidate. And all of this information is wonderful. So I just learned about a disruptive innovation. And I'm not quite sure how I'm going to work that in to achieve the solution that we're talking about for flourishing and moving people, just scooch them over enough so that they use their own intellectual worth to get over there See, because I was over here before. Now, I'm not sure how I got to this position I'm in now, but I am willing to grab any hand that wants to come go and support people into moving over. Homeless people, drug addicts, people with mental health. You know, I'm a lived experience. So how do we get there? I love that idea of a disruptive innovation. And mine today is, well, I call it breaking the invisible chains, life skills revolution. So it's to support people, homeless people, to move over, to learn the skills or to regain the skills, because most people already know them, but to regain the skills that they need to move out of supported housing. Who wants to live in the projects or wherever? You know, we name all that stuff something, but people want to move. You know, my cousin spent 40 years in prison, and he's been out for 3 years. And he went to Torrance. He said, Renee, there's no trash on the ground. I said, well, go see if you can get the place. Well, he can't get it with that PPP voucher. I said, well, go get you a job. You know, I support him in changing the way he thinks and his ability to move over, to be the God-given man he was created to be. And all of us in this room are standing like Isaac, that guy, he said, we are all standing in powerful positions. We have the power. And so everybody has power. We just forgot, you know? And all of these different policies, Section 8 and GR and all of this stuff that stagnates people, I don't know what I need to do besides scream and tell you that it's temporary. This is not your life. This is not you. This is not where you belong. Use it as a way to get started. What direction are you going? What do you want to be? What do you want to accomplish? It's so empowering, and I like that, to walk with people that just need a hand, just need the love and acceptance to move over. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I just wanted to touch up on this penalizing trafficking, because a lot of people don't understand the concept of it. And we penalize people because they're on the streets and we come and we do these cleanups and we do these care plus things and we put them in interim housing. Once we get in interim housing, the fact of the matter is we want to go to permanent support housing. Some of them have barriers, and their barriers happen to be Social Security, it happen to be words, and they happen to be GR or whatever else. Once they meet a certain threshold, they no longer qualify. That's the penalization, and that's the trapping. That trapping causes re-traumatization to the clients, and guess what? 6 months later, we see the same client on the streets. We're out there dealing with them again all over again. We closed this case out, we exited them out and everything, and guess what? We're putting them back in the system again. Did the system work? Did we dot the I's? Did we cross the T's? Did we get the data? Because it all comes down to the data. If you don't have the data and you're quantitative, guess what? That person is not a person. That person's a number. And what's the difference in that person being a number on the streets than being a number in prison? We went from the school to prison pipeline. Now we're going from the homeless to the permanent supportive pipeline. Housing is a hustle. It's a $1 billion industry. Billions and billions of dollars. It used to be prisons. Now it's a hustle. And it's all about what the providers can do on the ground, what kind of organization you got, who writes the best grant, how does it look good here? That's the way it is. But at the end of the day, even at St. Joseph's Center, we find that we're dealing with the human, we're dealing with people, and they're not disposable. We're trying to get everybody to understand that people are not disposable, they're not trash. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lynette Jenkins. I'm the Race Equity Committee co-chair. And I just want to capitalize on what that young lady was saying regarding identifying identifying the clients or participants as individuals who have strengths, who have desires, who have goals. They may, for whatever reasons, have fallen out of the trajectory. It doesn't mean they still don't have the capacity. But when people start giving you labels, you're disabled, you're ill-equipped, you're homeless, you're hopeless. They start wearing those labels. And when he talks about entrapment, they're entrapped in their own minds and other people's opinions of who they believe they are. So taking their hand and actually sitting down and identifying, where do you want to go? How do you believe you can get there? Let me help you secure the resources that you need to take you to the next level. This is how we get them out of entrapment, because no one should have to be dependent on a system to get to their level of thriving, because systems are people. And so if we don't teach the people how to operate the system in a flourishing manner, then what are we really doing?
She dropped the mic on that one.
Hi everyone, Joe, he, they pronouns, CSH, but I wear multiple hats because I also sit on 2 community land trusts. And I just want to name that because it all boils down to land, right? And as somebody who's connected with my ancestors and is connected to the tribal communities here in the Vanguard, also known as Los Angeles, it comes down to land and the relationship that people have with land. Now we call it private property, and now we have square footage and commodified everything, right? And so for me, flourishing really goes back to land, like our connection to it. And folks can't get out of permanent supportive housing if we don't have housing affordability, if they're not competing against a speculative market, right? And there is an irony that we're here at USC talking about this, who is a big gentrifier, like in communities, right? And so, before institutions, we had kinship, right? Before systems, we had kinship. We had community, and community is rooted, my wellness is rooted in my connection to my community. My liberation is connected to my compassionate relationships in my life, right? And this is the common denominator from working in homeless services for years, is folks have had broken families. Folks did not have a healthy support system. And there's no one to blame other than the institutions that perpetuate this. And these institutions were not designed by people of color. Like, these institutions were designed by white supremacy. And when we talk about data, right, this is also a factor of white dominant culture, is that data is a tangible thing. And this is the obsession, is like, where can we find the measurable outcome? Where can we find some things you can't? That's the mystery of life. And this is what healing is being able to build through relationships, right? If you're a caseworker, it's your relationship that will support the flourishing of your client. And so the data is not going to capture it. And how we define the measure of the tools also going to define how we're defining the situation. So it really comes with a whole cultural shift, right? I've always said homelessness is both a cultural issue and a systemic issue, right? The stigma will shape into policy. The policy will shape into who gets resources and who doesn't, who belongs here and who doesn't, right? And so it's a whole big spiritual shift as much as it is about having quality evidence-based services. So, and I could just go on in a rant, but just want to share this, yeah, that's it. I'll yield.
Thank you, Joe. Hi, my name is Tiffany Duvernay Smith. I'm a systems reform champion with lived experience in homelessness and other intersectionalities. Pondering the how. So if you ever heard me speak, I say love, justice, and equity. So I'm just bringing the other parts back into the conversation, because there's still the discriminatory and stereotypical lens that we look at people through. So we need that equity. And then the justice. the whole reason somebody's on the street in the first place is injustice, right? How we can treat that person as we're helping them navigate the system can also be full of injustice depending on who is touching that person along the way. I'm gonna call out the jealous case manager who will tell the participant it's a little bit of mess talking because they're about to get a spanking brand new Proposition HHH built just for them unit that the case manager doesn't even have because they're a check or two or less away from homelessness. They qualify for the services. So I'm only here for the participant to flourish. That's my why for coming here today. But I also know if the frontline staff isn't flourishing, you see what I'm saying? Because if rent is $2,000 and you have to make 3 times your rent, $6,000 for the year, $72,000 by the hours, $37.50. A case manager in the room who's making $37.50 an hour, I will close my eyes. Please stand up. I know nobody's standing up. I'm not going to turn around. $37.50. Who's paying $37.50 for a case manager? If you go look right now, you'll see 24, 25. Even for the supervisors, they're not at $37.50. And if you want to take that 2407 one-bedroom voucher, because I don't know what it is, it went up. But that 2407 number calculated out is $86,400 is $45 an hour. We really need to be paying people $45 an hour. So you want to talk about flourishing? Living wages, right? I'm also gonna lift up housing first. Sam, I'm going to bring housing first into this conversation because the 38 measures. So for the how, one thing we can do is look at the 38 measures on the Housing First Fidelity Scale, which is an evidence-based model. Which ones, if you're practicing column 4 at high fidelity, lines up with thriving and flourishing and wholeness and dignity and belonging, because are we funding enough for somebody's caseload to be less so that this person is getting all the attention that they need? Because my opinion, the goal for the person, according to the Housing First model, when I see through it, my revelation is, this is gonna increase somebody's quality of life, number 1. Number 2, they won't be homeless again. And number 3, this is on the DEI equity tip. Again, that 4th column, showcasing what high fidelity would look like. If you look at it real good, it's anti-racist already. You don't have to change anything. My recommendation is that if the government comes down too hard on Housing First, similar to like equity DEI, name it something different. That's how much I believe in what is written there in the evidence-based model. And for those who talk against Housing First, I guarantee you talk bad about it because it's not at full implementation here in Los Angeles. Do you know that in 2022, LA was declared a Housing First county? But is LA implementing at high fidelity? So these are the changes that need to be made. Lastly, I am the how. So how did I go to the street I'm going to be moderating a panel this afternoon, right? But how did I go to street and navigate housing? And then just a few months ago, so let me see, I got in my first apartment, Shelter Plus Care, in 2015. And then I was going to say I'm on a leave with LASA, but working at LASA for about to be 5 years. And 3 months ago, paying market rent for the first time since 2010. Yes, it's scary. Got on my big girl panties. Can I say that in this room? Bold and courageous, right? And it's scary. It's scary. Just know I'm a walking curriculum. We're ready to put it out there. Looking for somebody to partner with. And it's not just about me, but how I know that my how is a curriculum to help people flourish inside. Thank you.
I wanted to, there's so much incredible wisdom, richness in this room. My invitation is, how do we take that to the ground to accompany our clients and our frontline service workers? It's missing, right? A lot of them aren't here. And I think they feel this, they want to love, but it's been beaten out of them, right? And I think we're right that there's so much structural violence behind this, right? The racism, the white supremacy, the land grab. You're absolutely right. And yet we are expecting people, despite the structural violence, to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
And it's just wrong. And I think I spend a lot of time talking to ICMS workers. They want a curriculum, but they need help. And what do you want me to do? I have to fill out this paperwork. I have to have this many minutes with this many client. I have to make them into a good tenant. I have to deal with a property manager who's racist, who's kicking them out. Yeah, they want to get a job, but they have no skills. I don't have time to coach them up so that they can be, hireable. And who's going to do that work? Who's going to accompany the client? Because here I am. I have a caseload of not 20 people, 40 people. I'm breaking up 10 fights in the courtyard. How am I supposed to accompany this person to be able to get to a point where they could be in your situation and afford market rent? And guess what? There's not enough affordable housing because we killed that with Reagan in the 80s. So I think for me, it's what do we need to do to get down to that level to spread this wealth, but also accompany, how do we do that work alongside, and how do we invest in that, right? Because we're not investing in that. We're not investing in that next step. We're dealing with the tyranny of the urgent, and the urgent is getting worse. I mean, just the other day, I went to a site where really phenomenal ICMS agency said, I'm ready for housing last. Because you know what? These people, the clients, don't do what they're supposed to do, right? That's just tragic for me. But you know what? That's just because of the reality of the structural violence that we're facing. So what do we need to do to fix that? I think is a really important thing to talk about today, because there's a practicality to it. How do we get out there and do this? I'm not sure about, to be honest with you, but look forward to hearing more.
My name is Durian Dunbar, and I am a property manager with Trillium Property Management.
Excellent property
So, in regard to the latter part of the statement that you said the ICMS worker made in regards to the residents, that notion of they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Because actually they are.
Yeah.
They're living.
Yeah.
They are in permanent housing to be off the streets, to have a place to live and to rehabilitate and to stabilize and do all of these things in place with a roof over their head. However, at that level, and I think you've been speaking a lot to this point, and it just really hasn't come out, but when our participants / clients and now residents come into permanent housing, we have ICMS caseworkers on site, but they're not doing case management work. That case management component is lost when they move into permanent housing. And they're now more so receiving resident services. And you have ICMS workers who are providing resident services. You have case management who might be engaging with the residents in a third party system away from the property for those who are still connected to some form of case management. And then you have property management. And for me as a property manager, one of the things that I'm trying to bring into property management as a whole across the board with PSH is property management, property managers buying into the mission of what permanent supportive housing is. Because that's missing in great part as well in working in collaboration with the services.
We're going to bring you out so you can train all the property managers in the way, right? That's we'll see that. Yeah,
So,
it's important.
You know,
right?
I feel like if there was a way to reintegrate the intensive case management piece into permanent housing, we would then see that flourishing and that thriving and that readiness to move on and beyond more so than we're seeing it
And
now.
I wanted to answer your question about what was that particular situation. I'll tell you, it's a woman who's broken, right? Lots of abuse as a child, who is now doesn't have income, is doing commercial sex work in the building. There are predators in the building. And the ICMS, in saying that, it's not that she doesn't love or care, she doesn't know what to do, right?
Right.
And so it's that sort of response is because of that feeling of how am I supposed to help this person heal, right? And I think you're right. It shouldn't just be on her.
Right. Because
Right?
at the
It's
end
a
of the day,
community, but what is that community? How does it get called to come in and help that woman become a doctoral candidate? Right? That's our dream,
right.
right? But how do we do that?
And Jessica, you're crushing it.
It's
Really.
time to wrap
Yeah,
up.
it's not, but there's one other voice I want to lift up who had been waiting, Mom Mosley. And I just want to acknowledge as an elder, she's there with the microphone. Wave your hand, Mom Mosley. 83 years young. 83.
Thank you. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've changed my listening to people who live without walls rather than homeless. I'm changing in my seeing, because in my seeing, my thinking. And so if I see people who live without walls, I think one way. If I see the homeless, I think another way. So I have a son who is housed, who would be homeless except for his parent. So we intervene. Now, he's very bright and brilliant at times, and at times he's not. You know, and so we do our best not to judge him. And I think people who live without walls are affected by how they're seen. I think they're already traumatized. If people are about to go homeless, that's trauma. If they found themselves without walls, they're traumatized. So we have to think about, gosh, who in the world would live without walls? And what would their emotional state be? We have to think about that. We also have to think about that I love the ideal of flourishing and empowerment, but it's against the background of the underbelly in this country. The to disenfranchise, with all due respect. It was founded that way, as you were saying earlier. So we have to include that. And so I was thinking about, I made a note. Someone mentioned that about $100,000 is invested to return someone to mainstream America. Many are afraid to return to mainstream America. They don't trust mainstream America because they feel traumatized. And so that has to be included. So I thought case management, we won't have enough people who are employed to manage cases, but there's a group I know of young women who they were having babies for the first time, and they didn't know how to deal with becoming mothers. So there's a coalition of women who were having babies the first time, and now there are a coalition of women who actually support each other. So I was thinking people who have who have been returned to, I want to call mainstream America, this underbelly is still there. If there was some way to connect all these people who could be a support group for people who are still in process, I think that would make a difference. And so, having met a few of these women, I go, oh, I remember having my baby 100 years ago, so to speak. And I remember, I go, what did I do with this little baby? It's so sweet, but he won't stop crying, you know? And so the trauma doesn't stop because they've been going through the system. And so I think those who are in this work have to go, how do I keep them connected to, not like in the AA programs, they have big brothers and big sisters, but if they have something in common, they have so much in common that once they are out of the 6 months or a year, they still are connected to other people who are still in process. That way you build a whole other culture, I'm thinking.
Although he did articulate the perfect property management.
Also, when I drive now, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm seeing such a seemingly an escalation of people who live without wall. And so that has my full attention. I'm seeing so much more trash. I go, well, there's no place to put the trash. So what if there was some way of having certain areas where there was some place to put the trash? I don't think they want to live in trash. They have no place to put the trash. So I think we have to shift in our seeing and our listening and the language we're using to speak about this. And so I'm being very mindful and conscientious when I see people who gosh, gee, I go, I'll just wave. I'll just smile. Because how people are seen makes a difference. Yeah. How we see them makes a difference. So the how is what that comes to what. If I say how, then what comes. So what is called for from me as a person, as a citizen, I can wave, I can smile, you know, and I can participate in these conversations and say, well, how about connecting people who've been through the system with people who are in the system? That way it doesn't cost you more money. There's no funding because they're giving back. Because they're interested to give. They're giving back. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you, panelists. Thank you, Steph, for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Just one more time for our panel and for all the voices. Thank you.